Well, hi there students, it's Mr. Verzat and welcome to my classes. This video is a tutorial on how to deal with a couple of factors that are a challenge for students, especially when you've got multiple classes besides mine. What I'm going to do is show you the basic standards for how to handle attendance and absence. The second thing I'll show you is how to strategize if you fall behind in class, either because of an absence or if you're like me, you just maybe needed to take more time on a project. So let's get started. There are two major types of absences. The first is what I would like to call a sudden absence. That'd be something that's unplanned and out of your control. That would be like an emergency, if you're sick. And we all have that. And just so you know, everybody's going to miss a day of class. Even me. I get sick too. If you can keep a job at McDonald's, you can keep up in this class. You'll be fine. So these are the workplace norms that you'll find anywhere. Step one, you're going to be absent and something happens outside of your control. What you do is you communicate with your boss. If I'm sick at my job, I call and I let him know. If you work in a studio setting or something where there's a deadline there, then there needs to be the time made up. So what you'll do is you'll email or communicate with me. In that communication, somehow to get that time back. The communication will also allow me to bring you up to speed on what we're doing in class. Some labs allow you to do things on scratch paper and plan. Other labs require you to be here, which means even if you're sick or if you're sitting around in a waiting room or whatever, there are things you could do to get caught up. Now I know there's things like, let's say you have a relative die or you lose a limb or you got surgery. Obviously I don't expect you to work outside for that. But again, this is to protect you so that you don't get overloaded and you don't fall behind. With that communication, let's go to step two. A lot of my material is on the internet. You can also follow that from your class website. So let's take a look at the class website and let's go to, let's say, the graphic design class. Well, a few days ago, right here, we had instruction. I taught the students about something called the IKEA effect. I even included the timestamps for the video that we watched. And since this is all remote and you have a Chromebook, you and your illness or your absence could come to class having already watched this and be ready. You wouldn't need to waste time in class with a reteach. You wouldn't need to schedule time to get that knowledge. You would be ready when you appear in class. Which brings us to final step three. When you return to class, be prepared with the knowledge of what was taught and also any work that you completed while you were gone. Again, if things were outside of your control, you and I would have communicated about that, and I would have worked with you to help you make sure that you're not behind when you return. If there was nothing you could do in your absence, then you would have scheduled that makeup time or a reteach session or a tutoring session to have the knowledge. What you want to avoid is showing up in class and asking me this question: what did we do when I was gone? You should know that when you return and have done something to patch that or have something planned to patch that. Let's move on to the next one. This would be a planned absence. That would be if an upcoming test, sort of a field trip, something where you know in advance that you're going to be absent. How do you handle that? Well, if you know that you're absent, step one is communicate with me and schedule a time or get something going to patch that knowledge that you're going to miss. Plan ahead of time. Step two, work ahead in class, during your study hall or after school, or find any time that you can so that once you miss that class with that field trip or that test, you're already caught up when you're gone. You don't need to do anything when you return. You won't be overloaded. You won't be behind. You won't have to get any other knowledge. You would have met with me, we'd have tutored, and we'd have that hashed out beforehand so you can enjoy your field trip or go into your test without knowing that it's going to set you behind. All of this is called being proactive. It's a basic work skill that helps you to maintain employment. All right, let's talk about falling behind and pacing. So this course is a hands-on, lab-based class. What that means is that you're going to have a big thing that you have a short window of time to create. Meaning, we're going to have a deadline. And after that deadline, we move on to the next lab. The class doesn't stop if you're absent. So for example, lab number 1, we might have 4 days to do that lab, to build it, submit it, and then we move on. During this time, there's also going to be some instruction that happens. So you'll have a lot of instruction at the beginning, and then application, and maybe I'll patch a little instruction here and there, and then we wrap up. Once deadline hits, the process repeats itself. So for starters, if you're like me, and when I was in school, I didn't really work that fast, what if you need 5 days? You're here every day, but you just work slow. Deadline's going to come, and there's a late penalty if you turn your work in late. So you don't want to have it late. but then again, you need 5 days. Well, here's what you do. Somewhere along the lines, within this 4-day area, you would sneak that extra time in here. If you need 5 days, you could take this and you could break it up in pieces. All right, so like instead of doing a full amount of class, outside of class, you could do a third of this and then do a third another day and a third another day. And then you've just given yourself a boost and you're ready to go. Well, when do you do this? We'll get to that a little bit later. What you want to avoid is missing that deadline, and then when you are on your next lab, working on this in class because you've just set yourself behind now. We've just started lab number 2. I've just taught you new techniques, and then in order for those techniques to stick to your brain, we practice those hands-on. If you were to do something else besides the new techniques, chances are pretty good that when you come back to it a day later, you might not be very proficient at it. So that's why I tell my students that if you fall behind, work on current work in class and schedule your catch-up time outside of class. That way you learn. Now there's other things in class that we do, like thumbnail sketches, research, concepting work, and all of that can be done anytime. So in theory, if you're here for that new lab, you learn the skills or get a brief on what we're going to do, and somehow you manage your time well, you could do all of that concept work outside of class and devote that day in class to catch up. It really depends on you. It depends on the lesson, but just know it's very easy to fall behind. All right, so let's take a look at what happens if you're absent in here. Well, don't worry. I have what's called a support structure worked into the way the class works. If you're ever absent during the lab, your deadline is not going to be the same as the rest of the class. Your deadline is actually moved for every day that you're absent. When you come back, your deadline is not going to be at the end of that class, but rather the following class day. This is when it gets a little sticky. What if, when you return, it's the very beginning of a new lab, and I'm giving a lecture and teaching you brand new techniques, but you needed a full day to finish up your lab? Since we work on the block schedule at this school, that means you also got some other days between your classes too, so that there are preventative measures that you could take to make sure that your work is not late too. We could take this whole block, we could bust it over a portion of that in-between day and a portion of the day after school. But again, if we're doing new things in class, that might not give you the time in class to get wrapped up. So what you've done is you participate in the day's activities in class. If we're doing a critique on the day that you return, you'll participate with us in the critique. If we're beginning a new exercise that requires just sketching on scratch paper, you'll participate in the discussion, the lecture, but when it comes time to work, because you can take that concept work, that scratch paper home, that would be a great time to work on your backed up lab. You can just do the stuff that we were doing here outside of class. Either way, you must have that finished by your adjusted deadline. So what are the opportunities that you have? Well, there are a few. There's what's called Open Studio. That's usually when I stay after school for extra time to allow students to come in and get caught up. That's dependent on demand. For example, this year, nobody really used it, and so Open Studio doesn't happen anymore. If students use it, I'll definitely be there. Another thing you can do is take home what you can. Again, a lot of work that you do can be done on traditional drawing paper, or done on your Chromebook in a Google Doc, or watched and studied. Study hall is a big one. If you have a study hall, I give study hall passes. You can come here to get caught up. After school is another big one. Most days I'm here till 4 p.m. A lot of days later than that, you could take advantage. What I'd like you to avoid are what are called excuses. These are the big ones. I had other work. I had sports. I didn't have the time. Or I forgot. Those are the most common ones. And these are not counting, if you were sick or you had a dental appointment or something like that. This boils down to priorities. It isn't the priority of the class or how much fun you have in it. You're here ultimately to transition into college. And if your GPA is going to take a hit, jeopardizing that, your priorities should be reflected in doing the work here. How will what you do in this class impact your GPA? That might be where you want to go when you start to prioritize if you're going to take advantage of these opportunities or not. And let's take a look at what are called non-negotiables. There are some realities about life that no amount of opportunity can make up for. For example, at the end of the year, once school's out, there's no way to catch up. So even though deadlines are pushed to accommodate, that's not really going to help you if you only have 3 days of the school year left or if semester's almost done. Also, there's what I have in my class is a cutoff deadline for all late work. That's typically the last 3 weeks of both semesters. So by that point, you'd have heard in advance when that date is, about a month. Your parents would be notified, you'll be told, and you'll want to know that after that point, no missing work is accepted, period. And let's talk about falling behind. So again, let's say you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 days. Let's say that you are either absent or you fall behind. We've now spilled into the second lab and new learning has happened, new activity has occurred, but we don't have that first one done yet. It has what's called like a snowballing effect. So let's say you're behind, don't do anything to get caught up, and then now you don't start the new lab until day number 3 of lab number 2. And then that needs 4 days, plus we had lots of instruction and problem solving, and it's not until you get to the end of lab number 2 that finally we hash out a couple of these days and we get that old project in. Now it's counted late, and whatever you earned is now deducted by a letter grade. So if you earned a B, that's a C. If you earned an A, it's a B. And coming to class is the only thing that's happening to solve this. Now you're into lab 3 and you're still not even halfway through lab number 2. The end of the year shows up or that cutoff for late work happens. You're pretty much done. There's nothing you can do to solve that situation because nothing was done before that deadline. I strongly encourage you guys, do use those opportunities, do think ahead, look at the time that you have available and make the best use of it possible. Deadlines will move and accommodate absence, but there is that point in the year where there is no going back, and it's important that you get that under control early. Communicate early and often. I'll work with you. You'll have success based on how much initiative you have in order to meet that success. So as always, if you have questions, come and see me. I look forward to seeing you guys. Take care.